The air at the St. Jude Charity Gala in downtown Chicago crackled with the sound of champagne flutes and whispered negotiations. At the center of it all stood real estate magnate Richard Davenport and his elegant wife, Catherine. To the outside world, they were the city's golden couple wealth power and a baby on the way. But behind the veneer of their perfect life, a storm was gathering. In one explosive moment, a single shouted sentence would shatter their world, expose a devastating betrayal, and trigger a chain of events so catastrophic that by sunrise, Catherine would be fighting for her life on an operating table. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of lies, loss, and the horrifying price of a single, public denial. The grand ballroom of the Peninsula Chicago was a sea of glittering chandeliers and couture gowns. It was the annual St. Jude Children's Research Hospital Gala, the pinnacle of the city's philanthropic calendar. Richard Davenport, a man whose name was synonymous with Chicago's skyline, moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a lion in his own savannah. He was all sharp angles and expensive tailoring his smile, a well-practiced tool that could close a deal or disarm a rival with equal ease. On his arm was Catherine Davenport, his wife of 7 years. She was the quiet beauty to his roaring ambition, her presence a soft, calming influence. Tonight, she wore an emerald silk gown that draped elegantly over her burgeoning 6-month pregnancy bump. A delicate hand rested protectively over it, a gesture that had become second nature. While Richard basked in the spotlight, Catherine preferred the shadows, her smile genuine but tinged with a weariness no one seemed to notice. Theirs was a life lived in a gilded cage, and lately the gold had started to feel suffocatingly heavy. The whispers had been following them for months. Richard's late nights, his business trips that left no paper trail, the scent of a perfume, not her own, clinging to his suits. Catherine wasn't naive. She was a former art curator with a keen eye for detail and authenticity, and she knew a forgery when she saw one. Her husband's fidelity was a cheap imitation of the real thing. But for the baby, their miracle baby conceived after years of heartbreaking struggle, she had chosen to hold on, to believe the cage was worth the security it provided for their unborn child. Richard Darling cooed a society matron dripping in diamonds. "You and Catherine look absolutely radiant. Pregnancy suits you, my dear." Catherine offered a polite smile. "Thank you, Beatrice. We're very excited." Richard's hand tightened on the small of her back, a proprietary gesture that felt more like a warning than affection. "We are he," boomed his voice, carrying over the din. "A Davenport heir. It's about time." His focus was on legacy on a son, to carry his name and inherit his empire. It was a cold, transactional view of fatherhood that chilled Catherine to the bone. Their struggle to conceive had been a somewhat a clinical, emotionless journey for him, a project to be completed rather than a dream to be shared. The evening wore on a blur of air kisses and empty compliments. As Richard was deep in conversation with a potential investor, Catherine felt a shift in the room's atmosphere. The ambient chatter near the grand entrance hushed, replaced by intrigued murmurs. A woman had entered, and she was making a direct, unwavering line for their table. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with fiery red hair, and a dress that was a size too small and a shade too bright for the elegant affair. She moved with a defiant confidence that was both cheap and alarming. Catherine had never seen her before, but she recognized the look in the woman's eyes. It was the look of a lit match searching for gasoline. The woman stopped directly in front of Richard, completely ignoring Catherine. "Richie," she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. Richard's face, usually a mask of calculated charm, went rigid. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes before being replaced by cold fury. "What are you doing here?" "Sophia," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "What do you think I'm doing here?" The woman, Sophia, gestured dramatically to her own slightly rounded stomach, barely noticeable beneath the tight fabric of her dress. "I'm here for our baby. You can't just ignore my calls forever." The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen from the room. The nearby conversations died instantly. Every eye was now fixed on the unfolding drama. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Her hand, still resting on her own belly, began to tremble. This was it. The abstract fear, the nameless dread, now had a face and a name: Sophia. "I don't know what you're talking about," Richard snarled, his face turning a blotchy red. He took a step forward, creating a physical barrier between Sophia and Catherine, as if he could shield his wife from the mess he had created. "Oh, you don't know." Sophia let out a humorless laugh. "After our 6 months together. After all your promises, I'm pregnant, Richie. About 4 months along. And this baby is yours." Catherine felt a sharp, piercing pain in her abdomen, a cramp so intense it made her gasp. The room began to spin. She saw the faces of Chicago's elite, the mayor's wife, a federal judge. Richard's biggest business rival, Gregory Finch, all watching with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Her perfect life was imploding in the most public way imaginable. Richard looked from Sophia's defiant face to Catherine's pale, stricken one. The panic in his eyes was now fully visible. His reputation, his deals, his carefully constructed image, it was all crumbling. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He attacked. He pointed a finger at Sophia, his voice rising to a thunderous shout that echoed through the silent ballroom. "You are lying. I don't know who the father is, but that is not my baby." He then turned his eyes wild and looked directly at his wife's rounded belly, as if to draw a contrast. But the gesture was lost in his rage. He had just publicly declared his infidelity while simultaneously denying its consequences. Sophia burst into theatrical sobs. "How could you say that? You know it's yours." But Richard wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at Catherine, whose face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The pain in her abdomen intensified, a relentless, twisting knot. She couldn't breathe. The glittering chandeliers blurred into streaks of light. The muted sound of the orchestra faded into a dull roar in her ears. She saw Richard reach for her, his mouth forming her name. But it was too late. The gilded cage had shattered, and the broken pieces were all falling on her. Her legs gave way, and as she collapsed to the floor, the last thing she heard was her husband's desperate, panicked cry of her name. The ride from the peninsula back to their Lincoln Park mansion was a 15-minute journey that felt like a descent into the Arctic. The heated leather seats of the Mercedes-Maybach offered no comfort against the glacial silence that had frozen the air between Richard and Catherine. The chauffeur, a man named Thomas, who had been with Richard for a decade, kept his eyes glued to the road, his face a stony mask of professionalism, though Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders in the rear-view mirror. Catherine stared out the window, the blurred lights of the city streaking past like tears on the glass. The sharp cramp from the ballroom had subsided into a dull, persistent ache in her lower back and abdomen. Each throb was a physical manifestation of Richard's betrayal. The public humiliation was a wound that burned hotter and deeper than any private argument ever could. He hadn't just cheated. He had made her a spectacle, a fool in a room full of their peers, their rivals, their entire world. "Cat, please, Richard," finally broke the silence, his voice rough. "Just let me explain." Catherine turned her head slowly, her expression utterly vacant. "Explain what, Richard? Should we start with the 6 months you were with her? Or should we jump straight to the part where you screamed about paternity in front of 500 people, including Gregory Finch, who I saw practically salivating at the sight of your downfall? It's not what it looks like. He started the classic flimsy defense against of a guilty man. Then what is it?" She shot back, her voice low and trembling with a rage she hadn't felt in years. "What precisely does it look like when a woman I've never seen before, who knows your pet name, shows up claiming to be 4 months pregnant with your child? A claim you didn't even fully deny. You didn't say, 'I never slept with her.' You said, 'It's not my baby.' There's a world of difference in that sentence. Richard and you and I both know it." The car pulled into the sweeping, heated driveway of their limestone mansion. The house, usually a symbol of their success, felt like a mausoleum tonight. As Thomas opened her door, Catherine got out without waiting for Richard. She walked up the grand stone steps, her hand once again pressed against her belly, not for protection anymore, but as if to hold herself together. Inside the cavernous foyer was silent. Maria, their live-in housekeeper, had left a single lamp on in the living room, casting long, lonely shadows across the Italian marble floors. Richard followed her in shutting the heavy oak door behind him. The sound echoed with the grim finality. "Catherine, she's a lunatic, a gold digger. She cornered me at a conference in Miami 6 months ago. It was a mistake. One night. A stupid, meaningless mistake. A mistake that apparently lasted 6 months, according to her," Catherine said, not turning to face him. She walked towards the massive, curved staircase. She just wanted to go to her room, lock the door, and pretend this night never happened. "She's lying." Exaggerating, Richard's voice grew louder, laced with desperation. "I ended it. She got obsessive. Stalking me. I should have told you, I know. But I didn't want to upset you, not with the baby. Don't you dare." Catherine spun around, her eyes flashing. "Don't you dare use this baby. Our baby, the one we fought for. The one I injected myself with hormones for years as your shield. You didn't tell me because you're a coward. You were trying to have your cake and eat it too, and now you've gotten food poisoning and you're vomiting all over my life." Suddenly, a searing white-hot pain shot through her abdomen, so violent it stole her breath and buckled her knees. She cried out a sharp, guttural sound of pure agony and clutched her stomach. Catherine Richard rushed to her side, his anger instantly replaced by terror. "What is it? What's wrong?" "The baby." She gasped, her face ashen. A horrifying thought, a primal fear gripped her. Something's wrong. She looked down at her hands, then at the floor. She saw a dark, spreading stain on the emerald silk of her gown. Blood. The sight sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through Richard. The entire sordid drama of the evening evaporated, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of the woman he loved, and despite everything he did love her, crumpling in pain before him. "No, no, no," he chanted, scooping her into his arms. She felt impossibly light, her head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Maria, call 911. Now he bellowed, his voice echoing through the silent house. He carried her into the living room and laid her gently on the vast white sofa, which only served to make the crimson stain on her dress seem more garish, more terrifying. He grabbed a cashmere throw blanket and pressed it against her, a futile, panicked gesture. Maria, a kind, middle-aged woman, rushed in her face, pale with fear. She saw the scene and immediately fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. Catherine's eyes fluttered open, finding Richard's. The anger was gone from her gaze, replaced by a profound, heart-breaking terror. "Richard?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't let me lose our baby." In that moment, Richard Davenport, the titan of industry, the master of the universe, felt a helplessness so complete it was like drowning. His lies, his mistress, his public humiliation. It was all meaningless noise compared to the siren he could now hear approaching in the distance, a wail that sounded like a scream for everything he was about to lose. The consequences of his actions were no longer about bad press or a difficult divorce. They were being measured in heartbeats and measured in blood on his own white sofa. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was Richard's version of hell. It was brutally lit, smelled of antiseptic and human fear, and was filled with a suffering he couldn't pave over, buy out, or intimidate. Here his name meant nothing more than the letters on an insurance card. He was just another terrified husband in an uncomfortable chair waiting. He had been stripped of his custom-tailored suit jacket, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. A nurse had briskly taken Catherine away the moment the paramedics wheeled her through the automatic doors. He'd tried to follow, but a firm hand on his chest had stopped him. "Family waiting area, sir. A doctor will be with you shortly." Shortly had stretched into an eternity. He stared at his hands. A faint brownish smear of Catherine's dried blood was ingrained in the creases of his knuckles. He had tried to wash it off in the men's room, scrubbing until his skin was raw, but he could still see it, a phantom stain of his guilt. His mind replayed the evening in a torturous loop. Sophia's venomous smile, the collective gasp of the ballroom, the look of utter devastation on Catherine's face. And then the scream. That sound would be etched into his memory forever. What had he been thinking? He tried to rationalize it. The pressure from his father, even after his death, to produce an heir. The clinical, sterile nature of their fertility treatments had eroded the intimacy between him and Catherine, leaving a void. Sophia had been an escape, a cheap, thrilling, ego-stroking escape from the stress and the quiet disappointment at home. It was meant to be meaningless, a temporary lapse in judgment. He had convinced himself it was a separate part of his life, a secret compartment that would never touch the rest of his world. Now that compartment had burst open, poisoning everything. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. He ignored it. It would be his PR team, his lawyers, Gregory Finch, probably texting some snide, faux-concerned message. The world could burn. The only thing that mattered was behind a set of closed doors down the hall. Mr. Davenport, Richard's head snapped up. A man in blue scrubs and a white coat stood before him. He looked tired, but focused his name tag, reading Dr. Benjamin Carter. Richard shot to his feet. "How is she? Is the baby okay? Is my wife okay?" The questions tumbled out, raw and desperate. "Doctor." Carter's expression was grave, which sent a fresh wave of ice through Richard's veins. "Your wife is stable for the moment. She suffered a significant bleeding event. We've managed to control it, but she is not out of the woods. We had to rush her into emergency surgery." Surgery? What kind of surgery? For what? Richard's mind raced. A C-section. Was the baby coming now 3 months early? It's a complicated situation, Mr. Davenport, the doctor said, choosing his words with care. The extreme emotional and physical distress she experienced tonight appears to have triggered a severe complication with the pregnancy. We're doing everything we can. The doctor's careful phrasing terrified Richard more than any blunt diagnosis could. Complicated. Severe complication. These were words used to soften a blow. "Can I see her?" Richard pleaded. "She's in surgery right now. It will be several hours. The best thing you can do is wait. We'll update you as soon as we know more, Doctor." Carter said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He gave Richard a sympathetic, if weary, look, and then disappeared back through the doors. Left alone again in the waiting room, Richard sank back into the chair, the thin veneer of his composure completely gone. He buried his face in his hands, the image of Catherine's whispered plea. "Don't let me lose our baby," echoing in his head. He had always seen himself as a builder. He built skyscrapers. He built an empire. He built a reputation. But tonight, he was forced to confront the truth. He was a destroyer. He had taken the most precious thing in his life, the loving, stable home Catherine had painstakingly built for them, and he had leveled it with his recklessness. He had done it for his ego, for a fleeting thrill, for a lie he told himself about what a powerful man was entitled to. Now, under the unforgiving fluorescent lights of a hospital corridor, he was just a man who might lose his wife, his child, and his soul, all in one night. And as he sat there helpless and broken, he finally understood. The real price of his affair wasn't a messy divorce or a public scandal. The price was being paid right now in an operating room by the two people he was supposed to protect. The world returned to Catherine in fragments, the rhythmic beep of a machine, the scratchy feel of a blanket, the dull ache that permeated her entire being. She opened her eyes to the pale, sterile white of a hospital room ceiling. Sunlight streamed through a window, signaling that the longest night of her life had finally given way to a new day, a day she had survived. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her abdomen made her wince and fall back against the pillows. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach. It felt different, softer, emptier. A cold, gut-wrenching panic seized her. The baby, she croaked, her voice raw. "My baby." A nurse who had been quietly checking her vitals came to her side. "Easy now, Mrs. Davenport. The doctor will be in to speak with you in just a moment. He's on his way." The moments stretched into an agonizing eternity. Catherine's mind was a frantic blur of fear. She couldn't feel the familiar flutters and kicks that had been her constant companions for the past few months. There was just a hollow, aching void. The door opened, and Dr. Carter entered, his face etched with a combination of professional sympathy and profound weariness. He pulled a chair up to her bedside. "Mrs. Davenport." "Catherine, I'm Dr. Carter." "I was your surgeon last night," he began gently. "How are you feeling?" "Where is my baby?" she asked, cutting straight through the pleasantries. Her eyes bore into his, pleading for an answer she was terrified to hear. Dr. Takata took a deep breath. "The surgery was successful in that we were able to stop the hemorrhaging and save your life. You had what's called a placental abruption, where the placenta detaches from the uterine wall. It was severe, and the baby," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Here the doctor paused. His expression shifted, becoming more complex. "This is the difficult part to explain. Your case is quite unique. Your initial ultrasounds were done at a private clinic, correct?" Catherine nodded, confused. Yes, Dr. Simmons. Richard insisted on it. It was more discreet. Dr. Carter nodded slowly, a look of understanding dawning on his face. Well, our imaging here at the hospital is significantly more advanced, and it revealed something your previous scans seem to have missed. Catherine, you have a condition called a bicornuate uterus, or a heart-shaped uterus. It's not uncommon, but it can complicate a pregnancy. And in your case, you were pregnant with twins. The word hit Catherine with the force of a physical blow. Twins, she gasped. It was impossible. They had done IVF. One embryo. One precious, viable embryo. We believe the embryo split very early on, resulting in identical twins, each developing in one of the horns of your uterus. It's a 1 in a million occurrence, but it happens. The position they were in could have made one fetus obscure the other on a less sophisticated ultrasound machine. Catherine stared at him, her mind reeling. Twins. All this time she had been carrying 2 babies, a secret joy she never even knew she possessed. Dr. Carter's face softened with pity. The placental abruption, it occurred with one of the twins. The stress and trauma of your evening likely caused a massive spike in blood pressure, triggering the event. We did everything we could, but I am so sorry. We were unable to save him. A sob, raw and animalistic, tore from Catherine's throat. A son. She had lost a son she never even knew she had. The abstract grief she had been bracing for became suddenly horrifically specific. It was a person, a life, a future gone. And it was gone because of Richard, because of his lies, his cruelty, his public theatrical display of betrayal. His shouted words, "It's not my baby," now seemed like a curse that had struck down one of his own children. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot. But as the first wave of devastating grief washed over her, something else began to crystallize in its wake, ice-cold, diamond-hard rage. And the other one, she asked, her voice shaking, but firm. The other baby. A small, almost imperceptible glimmer of hope entered the doctor's eyes. The other baby? A girl is stable. Her placenta is intact. The surgery didn't affect her. You're still pregnant, Catherine. You're still at 25 weeks. Your daughter is a fighter. She is small, but she is strong. A daughter. She had a daughter, a tiny, resilient life still clinging on inside of her, having weathered the most violent of storms. The knowledge didn't erase the grief, but it ignited a ferocious protective instinct, unlike anything she had ever felt. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her mind was suddenly chillingly clear. Richard had done this. He had cost her a child. He would not cost her another. She looked directly at Dr. Carter. "Doctor," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier fragility. "I need you to do something for me. And it needs to be completely confidential. I need a non-invasive prenatal paternity test done. On my daughter. I need to know who her father is. And I need the results to come only to me. My husband is not to know about this. About any of it. Not the twins, not the loss, not the test. Do you understand?" Dr. Carter looked at the woman before him. He had seen her wheeled in a broken victim. But the woman looking at him now was a survivor forged in fire. He saw the pain, the grief, but he also saw a resolve as strong as steel. "I understand, Mrs. Davenport," he said, nodding slowly, completely. For 2 days, Catherine remained in the sterile sanctuary of her private hospital room. She allowed no visitors except for her medical team. Richard had tried, of course. He sent flowers, a veritable forest of funereal white lilies that she had the nurses immediately remove. He sent texts filled with frantic apologies and desperate pleas. He had even shown up only to be turned away by a stern nurse acting on Catherine's explicit instructions. Being cut off was driving Richard mad. He was a man who solved problems by throwing his presence, his power, and his money at them. But he couldn't breach the walls of Catherine's quiet, determined silence. He had no idea about the twin, the loss, the devastating secret she now harbored. He only knew what the hospital had officially told him. Catherine had suffered a severe pregnancy complication, but was now stable, and the baby was still viable. He clung to that sliver of news, assuming his mistake would eventually be forgiven, that he could fix this. He had no idea the foundation of their world had not just cracked, but had been pulverized into dust. On the third morning, Catherine made her first and only call. "Olivia," she said, her voice still weak but steady. "Cat. Oh my God, I've been calling you. I've been calling Richard. I heard what happened at the gala. I've been so worried." The voice on the other end belonged to Olivia Reed, Catherine's best friend since their freshman year at Yale, and now one of Chicago's most formidable divorce attorneys. "I'm okay, Liv." Catherine interrupted. "Well, no, I'm not. But I'm alive. Can you come to the hospital? There's a side entrance on Erie Street. Come to room 714, and tell the nurse's station you're my cousin. I don't want Richard to know you're here." An hour later, Olivia slipped into the room. Her usual sharp, tailored suit, replaced with jeans and a sweater. Her expression a mixture of relief and deep concern. She took one look at her friend, pale and diminished in the hospital bed, and her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Cat," she breathed, rushing to her side and enveloping her in a hug. Catherine held on tightly, and for the first time since her conversation with Dr. Carter, she let herself cry. She told Olivia everything, the whole sordid story. Richard's affair, the humiliation at the gala, the agonizing pain. And then she told her the secret she'd shared with no one else, the truth about the twins. The loss of her son, and the paternity test she had ordered for her surviving daughter. Olivia listened in stunned silence, her expression morphing from sympathy to shock, and finally to a cold, professional fury. When Catherine finished, Olivia's compassionate friend persona had vanished, replaced by Olivia Reed Eskew, a woman known for dismantling powerful men in court. That bastard, Olivia said, her voice a low growl. "He didn't just humiliate you, Catherine. His actions had a direct, catastrophic physical consequence. He cost you your son." She squeezed Catherine's hand. "Okay. From this moment on, we operate with a strategy. No more emotion. This is about protection. Your protection and the protection of your daughter." Catherine nodded, wiping her eyes. "What do I do?" "First, you continue to keep him at arm's length. No communication. Let him stew in his own guilt and ignorance." "It gives us time," Olivia instructed, already, pacing the small room like a caged panther. "Second, while we wait for those paternity results, we act as if Richard is the father. We need to secure your position. I'll start the paperwork. We need a full accounting of all marital assets, his private holdings, everything. He has a history of hiding money in shell corporations. My forensic accountants will find it." She paused, her gaze turning sharp. "Now let's talk about the catalyst. Sophia Rossi, You said she claimed to be 4 months pregnant. Catherine nodded. That's what she said. Something about that stinks, Olivia mused. The timing is too perfect, the performance too theatrical. A man like Richard Davenport, for all his faults, is not stupid. He's paranoid and controlling. If he'd had a long-term affair, he would have had that woman on a tight leash. For her to show up like that, it feels like an ambush. It feels like a hustle. A new thought took root in Catherine's mind. She had been so consumed by Richard's betrayal that she hadn't considered Sophia's motives beyond simple vindictive greed. You think she's lying? Catherine asked. I think it's a distinct possibility we need to investigate, Olivia said. Rich, powerful men are targets. A fake pregnancy is the oldest trick in the book. If we can prove she is not pregnant, or that the baby isn't his, it doesn't absolve Richard of his infidelity. But it completely changes the narrative. It exposes him as a fool, not just an adulterer, and it gives you incredible leverage. Olivia pulled out her phone. I have a private investigator I use for high net worth cases like this. His name is Frank Miller. He's discreet and he's ruthless. I want him to dig into every corner of Sophia Rossi's life. Medical history, financials, social media, past relationships. I want to know what she had for breakfast 2 years ago. A sense of purpose began to replace Catherine's grief-stricken inertia. For weeks, she had been a passive victim of her husband's choices. Now she was taking control. She was no longer just a wife fighting for her marriage. She was a mother fighting for her children, the one she had lost and the one she would protect at all costs. Do it, Catherine said, her voice resonating with newfound strength. Find out who Sophia Rossi really is. As Olivia made the call, Catherine looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. The very buildings Richard was so proud of. They looked cold and impersonal. Her future wasn't in that world anymore. Her future was a tiny, fragile heartbeat, and she would build a fortress around it, brick by painful brick. The war had just begun. Frank Miller, the private investigator, worked with the silent efficiency of a shark. While Catherine focused on her recovery in the hospital, undergoing monitoring and resting to ensure her daughter's fragile stability, Frank began to systematically dismantle Sophia Rossi's life. Olivia served as the conduit, relaying updates to Catherine in hushed, strategic phone calls. The first thread unraveled quickly. Sophia claimed to be under the care of a Dr. Alistair Finch at a boutique obstetrics clinic in the Gold Coast. A few calls from Frank confirmed that no Dr. Alistair Finch was licensed to practice medicine in the state of Illinois. The clinic itself didn't exist. It was a phantom, a name plucked from thin air. Next, Frank dug into her finances. Sophia Rossi was drowning in debt. Credit cards, student loans from a community college she'd dropped out of, and a high-interest personal loan from a shady online lender. She lived in a small rented apartment in Wicker Park, 3 months behind on rent. There was no sign of the lavish lifestyle Richard's money should have afforded a long-term mistress. This wasn't the profile of a woman being kept by a millionaire. It was the profile of someone desperate. The most damning evidence came from a deep dive into her digital footprint. Frank's team recovered deleted files from her laptop's hard drive. Among them were receipts from a website that specialized in hyper-realistic props for movies and theater. The purchase made 2 months prior, 1 custom silicone pregnancy belly, 3 4-month gestation. There was also a photoshopped ultrasound image, the name and date clumsily edited. Frank cross-referenced the image. It was a stock photo from a generic medical website. The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place when Frank interviewed a former co-worker of Sophia's from a bar she'd worked at a year ago. Sophia. Yeah, she was always running some kind of hustle, the woman said, happy to talk for $100 bill. Always talking about landing a rich guy. Said her golden ticket was a baby. She even joked about how easy it would be to fake it, just long enough to get a settlement. Olivia arranged the meeting. It was time for the confrontation. Catherine discharged from the hospital, and now resting at a secure suite at the Four Seasons, a neutral ground paid for by Olivia's firm, agreed to be there. She needed to see it for herself. Sophia Rossi arrived looking flustered and indignant, clearly not expecting to see Catherine. She had probably anticipated a meeting with Richard's lawyers to discuss a payout. Instead, she found herself facing Catherine, looking pale but resolute in a comfortable armchair, and Olivia Reed, who stood like a sentinel, a thin file folder in her hand. "Thank you for coming." "Ms. Rossi." Olivia began, her tone polished ice. "Where's Richard?" Sophia demanded, clutching her purse to her stomach, which was now noticeably, if suspiciously, rounder. "He's not here. This meeting is with us," Catherine said, her voice quiet but firm. "We have some questions for you." "I have nothing to say to you," Sophia sneered. "My business is with my baby's father." Olivia smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "That's the core of the issue, isn't it? The baby. Let's talk about your physician, Dr. Alistair Finch. We can't seem to find him, or his clinic. Perhaps you could provide us with a phone number." Sophia's face went blank. I don't have it on me." "Of course not," Olivia continued smoothly, opening the file. "Let's talk about this instead." She slid a printed receipt across the coffee table. The receipt for the silicone belly. "Is this your purchase from Theatrical Props Net?" "It's quite a popular item, I hear. Very lifelike." The color drained from Sophia's face. She stared at the paper as if it were a snake. That's not mine. This is a trick. Is this also a trick?" Olivia added a second sheet to the table, the stock ultrasound photo next to the photoshopped version from Sophia's laptop. "The pixelation around the name is a bit of a giveaway, don't you think?" Sophia began to tremble, her carefully constructed charade crumbling around her. She looked from the evidence to Catherine's unwavering, pitying gaze. Why Catherine asked the single word filled with the weight of all she had lost. Why would you do this? Sophia's facade finally shattered. The defiant gold digger vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered young woman. Tears of genuine fear and panic streamed down her face. "I was in trouble," she sobbed, her body deflating as if the fake belly had suddenly lost its air. "I owed people money. I heard the guys at the conference in Miami talking about him, about Richard Davenport, how obsessed he was with having an heir. It was just supposed to be a one-night thing, but he was so drunk talking about his wife and their problems. I saw an opportunity. I thought if I said I was pregnant, he'd just pay me to go away. A few $1,000s to solve my problems. I never thought he'd deny it like that. I never thought anyone would get hurt." Catherine listened to the pathetic confession, and she felt nothing but a vast, empty coldness. This woman's cheap, desperate lie had set in motion a series of events that had cost Catherine her son. There was no grand conspiracy, no master plan, just a pathetic, small-time con that had spiraled into an unimaginable tragedy. "Get out," Catherine said, her voice flat. Sophia looked up, stunned. "What?" "Get out of my sight." Catherine repeated, her voice rising with a cold fury that was more terrifying than any scream. "You have no idea what you've done." Olivia stepped forward. "Miss Rossi, a word of advice. You will disappear. You will never contact the Davenports again. If you do this file, along with evidence of your wire fraud and extortion attempts, will go directly to the district attorney. Are we clear?" Sobbing Sophia scrambled to her feet and practically ran from the hotel suite, leaving the damning evidence sitting on the table. Catherine stared at the papers, the proof of a lie that had destroyed half of her world. The first battle was won. But now came the war. She had to face Richard. She had to tell him everything. Richard Davenport unlocked the door to the Lincoln Park mansion and stepped inside. The house was unnervingly still. In the week since he had been exiled from Catherine's life, the silence had become his constant companion, a suffocating presence that amplified the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the frantic pounding of his own heart. He had ordered Maria, the housekeeper, to take the week off, unable to bear her pitying glances. Now every gleaming surface and priceless artifact seemed to mock him, reflecting the image of a diminished, haunted man. The summons from Olivia had been curt and clinical, specifying a meeting at the house. He had spent the last 48 hours rehearsing his speech, crafting the perfect blend of contrition and forward-thinking strategy. He had uncovered Sophia's fraud, a fact he believed was his trump card. It was proof that he was the victim of a malicious con, not just a common adulterer. He clung to this belief like a drowning man, to a piece of driftwood, convinced it would be the key to rebuilding his shattered world. He walked into the cavernous living room and found her waiting. Catherine stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathed in the cool afternoon light. She was not dressed in the soft, flowing fabrics he was used to, but in sharp, dark trousers and a simple silk blouse. The clothes were an armor. She looked thinner, and the faint shadows under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, but her posture was erect, her gaze steady. The fragility he had so often mistaken for weakness had been burned away, replaced by something hard and unbreakable. Beside her, Olivia Reed stood with a leather portfolio, her expression neutral, but her presence formidable. Cat Richard began, his voice raspy. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands outstretched in a gesture of appeal. "Thank God. I've been going out of my mind. Listen, I know how bad this looks, but I have news. Sophia, it was all a lie, a scam. I hired my own investigator. She faked the whole thing. The pregnancy, everything. She's a con artist who was deep in debt. I was a target, Cat. A mark. We can expose her, we can sue her, we can put this entire nightmare behind us and start over." He delivered the lines with a rush of desperate optimism, expecting to see relief dawn on Catherine's face. He imagined they would weather the scandal together, a united front against a common enemy. He was ready to plan the PR campaign, the damage control, the triumphant return to society. Catherine met his hopeful gaze with a look of such profound, empty pity that it stopped him cold. She let out a short, hollow laugh that held no humor, only bitterness. "Start over," she repeated the words, tasting like poison in her mouth. "You think that's what this is about?" Her lie. "You think the problem is a 20-something con artist from Wicker Park?" She took a step toward him, and for the first time he felt a flicker of fear. This was not the wife he knew. Her lie was just the match, Richard. "You had already soaked our entire life in gasoline. Do you even remember what we went through to get pregnant? The years of clinics, the injections I had to give myself every single night while you were out at business dinners. The emotional toll. Or was that just another project for you? Another line item in the budget for the Davenport legacy? Of course I remember, he said defensively, but his voice lacked conviction. I don't think you do, she countered, her voice dangerously quiet. You just remember the goal and air. Well, at the hospital after I collapsed, they discovered something, Richard. A medical anomaly. I have a condition, a bicornuate uterus. It's heart-shaped. He stared at her, confused by the sudden diversion into medical terminology. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? It means the initial ultrasounds, the ones at your discreet private clinic, missed something. They missed the fact that our single precious embryo had split very early on. They missed that I was pregnant with twins. The word hung in the air, charged and impossible. Richard's mind reeled, trying to grasp the concept. Twins. The idea was so staggering, so far beyond his calculated plans, that he could only stare at her, speechless. A flicker of something disbelief, wonder. Even a strange, possessive joy crossed his face. 2 heirs. But his fleeting expression was met with the cold, hard reality of Catherine's face. She was not sharing a miracle with him. She was delivering a verdict. We were having 2 babies, Richard. She clarified, her voice flat and methodical, as if she were reading a coroner's report. A boy and a girl. A son. The word hit him with the force of a physical blow. A son. The one thing he had craved above all else. He saw a flash of an imagined future, a small hand in his teaching a boy to read financial reports, seeing a young man with his eyes sitting across from him in the Davenport Tower boardroom. Legacy secured, where he finally managed to ask the past tense of the verb, a cold spike of dread in his gut. Catherine's composure finally cracked a single tear, tracing a path down her cheek. But her voice remained steady, infused with a chilling resolve. The night of the gala, she began her gaze unwavering. When you stood before our friends, our colleagues, our entire world, and you screamed at that woman, the shock, the humiliation. It was more than my body could handle. It triggered a massive placental abruption. I was hemorrhaging, Richard, bleeding to death on our living room floor. He flinched as if she had struck him. He remembered the blood, the panic, the siren's wail. The doctors at Northwestern are the only reason I'm standing here today, she continued. They performed emergency surgery. They managed to save me. She paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to absorb the weight of every word. And they saved our daughter. He waited for the other half of the sentence, his entire being locked in a state of suspended terror. We lost our son Richard, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more powerful than any shout. He died. While you were likely on the phone with your lawyers, trying to contain the scandal, a team of doctors was fighting to save a family you didn't even know you had. And they lost. Your son died because your ego was more important than your wife's well-being. He died because of a lie you told to cover up another lie. No. The word was a strangled gasp. He staggered backward, his legs giving out as he collapsed into a nearby armchair. He buried his face in his hands, but he couldn't block out the image her words had created. A son lost. No, that's not possible. The doctors, they must have made a mistake. There was no mistake, Catherine said, her voice devoid of sympathy. She had already processed this. She had grieved. Now she was merely the messenger of his consequences. You stood in that ballroom and you yelled, "It's not my baby." You were wrong. There were two of them, and because of you now there is only one. Olivia Reed stepped forward, her movements precise and silent. She placed two documents on the polished mahogany table in front of him. The first was a single sheet of paper, a lab report. Our daughter Catherine said quietly, her gaze fixed on him. "She is yours, Richard. The paternity test confirms it with 99.9% certainty. Congratulations. You have your heir." The confirmation, which should have been a moment of triumphant relief, felt like the cruelest of jokes. He stared at the paper, the clinical text blurring through his tears. He was a father, and he was a failure. He looked up at Catherine, his face a mask of desperation and agony. "Catherine, Cat, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "We can't. I can fix this. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. To her. I'll do anything. Fix this." She echoed, her voice incredulous. "Can you bring my son back, Richard? Can you erase the memory of me bleeding on the floor? Can you unsay the words you shouted in front of 500 people? No. There is nothing to fix. There is only what's left." She took a slow, deliberate breath. "And what's left is me and my daughter. You will be her father financially. You will provide for her every need. But you will not be a parent, not in the way you imagine. You will have scheduled visitations. You will have no say in her schooling, her upbringing, or the values she is taught. You forfeited that right when you chose your pride over your family." She then slowly, deliberately twisted the large diamond engagement ring from her finger, the diamond he had used to acquire her, to seal the ultimate deal. She walked to the table and placed it gently next to the paternity test. Beside it, Olivia placed the second document, a thick stack of papers bound in a blue cover. "Divorce papers. These are non-negotiable," Catherine stated. "My life and my daughter's life will no longer be lived in your world of galas and empty transactions. We're going to have a quiet life, a real one." Richard stared at the three items on the table. The proof of the child, he had the symbol of the wife he had lost, and the legal document severing their union. It was the trinity of his undoing. Catherine turned and walked toward the foyer without a single backward glance. Olivia followed. The sound of the heavy front door closing echoed through the mansion with a deafening finality. Richard was left alone in the crushing silence. He sat there for a long time, unmoving. Eventually, he reached out a trembling hand and picked up the paternity report. His daughter. Then he looked at the ring, its fire and brilliance now seeming cold and dead. He pushed the divorce papers away. He couldn't bear to touch them. He stood up and walked, as if in a trance, up the grand staircase, toward the second floor. He went to the room at the end of the hall, the one they had been turning into a nursery. He pushed the door open. The late afternoon sun streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The walls were painted a soft, neutral yellow, and in the center of the room, side by side, sat two identical unassembled cribs, still in their flat-pack boxes. Catherine had ordered them weeks ago, explaining with a faint smile that she just had a feeling. He had dismissed it as feminine intuition. He walked over and rested a hand on one of the boxes, then the other. One for his daughter, one for the son he would never know. The full horrifying weight of his actions crashed down on him, not with a scream, but with a soul-crushing quiet. He had gained his empire, but he had lost his world. And in the silence of the empty room, surrounded by the ghosts of what could have been, Richard Davenport finally began to pay the price. Catherine Davenport's story is a harrowing testament to the fact that the deepest betrayals often come not from our enemies, but from those we trust the most. It's a story about the devastating ripple effects of a single lie and how the pursuit of ego can lead to unimaginable loss. But more than that, it's a story of resilience. In the face of public humiliation and private heartbreak, Catherine found an inner strength she never knew she had, the strength of a mother, determined to protect her child and forge a new life from the wreckage. What would you have done in her position? Can a man like Richard ever truly find redemption? Or is the ghost of his lost son a life sentence? If this story of profound loss and quiet strength moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with others who appreciate powerful, true-to-life drama. And to ensure you don't miss our next story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. Thank you for listening.